Hey everyone, it's Kim here with my first swimsuit tutorial for 2021. This is the Rashguard by Lowland Kids, and I am loving this pattern so much. So right off the bat, my first tip for working with swimwear is to always use a rotary cutter and a mat to be able to cut out your pieces. It's very basic, but that's what you need to do. So to start off, if you're doing a ruffle, you need to make sure you have that ruffle piece. You need to make sure you have your binding cut out. Two sleeves. You'll need to have lining for the body pieces, the front and back, and then of course the swim fabric for the front and back as well. All right, we are going to begin by taking the two back pieces, the lining and the swim fabric. You are going to place the liner right sides together with the swim fabric. Also, I had just cut these out into circles, didn't really make the notch there, so if you also did that, then go ahead and make your notch. Just cut it straight up. So place these right sides together, and we're going to go ahead and sew the keyhole and then flip it right sides out. As a heads up, a lot of my stitches will be done on a serger, so it'll be serged edges. If you do not have a serger, just use a zigzag stitch. It works the exact same, it offers you the stretch that you need, and a great finish with swim fabric. So you have that back piece turned right sides out. Now it's time to layer the front pieces. This is the more confusing part, but just follow along. I'm going to put the front piece right sides together with the back piece so that the two prints are touching each other. And then I like to layer the liner on top of that so that the wrong sides are facing the print right now. And then I wrapped around the liner from the back piece over to the front, making sure that the linings are right sides together. So you want your two prints to be right sides together and your two linings to be right sides together. Whether you choose to slip your lining underneath or have the fabric, the print on underneath, doesn't matter, but the order needs to basically be front liner, back liner, back swim, front swim. As long as they're stacked in that order, everything will work. So now we're lining up the sides. This side seam here, making sure that all four pieces are lined up at the top, all four pieces are lined up at the bottom, on either side, as well as the crotch seam. Now, when it comes to swim fabric, it is so slippery, it loves to move around, so I get very pin happy and put a lot of pins in place to make sure that everything lines up. And with that crotch seam, I folded everything in half to make sure that my center seam was right. That was just something that I like to do typically. So go ahead and stick all your pins in there and get yourself ready to take it to the machine. And so now we're going to sew down the two side seams and that crotch seam. And when you get back, I'm going to show you the magic of what we just did. Okay, so here it is. I serged it, but once again, a zigzag stitch works great. So now what you want to do, just to make sure you did it correctly, is turn it right sides out so you can see that the print is showing on the outside, the lining is on the inside, and when you take a look inside, here's what's magical. You don't see that raw edge at all. You don't see the seam. You can only see the lining looks pretty out there and the outer part looks pretty, and the seam is tucked in between those layers, and so that's why we had to stack it in just that right order. Next up are the sleeves, and we are going to hem them before we attach them to the swimsuit. So just go ahead and fold them up about, I don't know, probably an inch or so, maybe 3/4 of an inch, and pin them in place. Clips are also great for swimwear, by the way, but sometimes I feel like pins hold things a little bit more secure, so do whatever is best for you. I am going to do this with my reverse cover stitch because I think it looks cool, but you can use the regular cover stitch or a twin needle. I do recommend actually using a twin needle in all the things that you would normally use it in, and not just doing a top stitch with a straight stitch, because swim fabric is very stretchy and it will pop stitches. And as soon as you're done hemming, then we're going to fold these in half and close up this seam here, and we're going to do a set in sleeve. I wanted to show you that when I am at the serger, I tend to make sure that my sides are lined up, and then I hold a finger on top to make sure that my swim fabric does not slip. So this is how I deal with the slipperiness of the fabric, as well as lots of pins and clips, like I've always said. So yeah, I just kind of keep my fingers right on top, and that's sort of how I guide it to make sure that things aren't slipping out of place. All right, here are those sleeves. They are done. I'm just gonna pull them right sides out and kind of show you how I ended up finishing it. And just so you know, I do the finishing touches later with the those little tails that you see on there. So yeah, don't worry about that right now. But we're gonna have the sleeves be right side out, and then have the swimsuit, the body of the swimsuit, be inside out. And we're gonna do a set in sleeve. So we're just gonna set it inside the swimsuit. Now, as you can see, this is like a raglan style. So there's one side of the sleeve that's a little bit taller than the other side. That taller side goes toward the back of the swimsuit, and then the one that goes a little bit lower goes towards the front of the swimsuit. So that's how you can know which sleeve goes in which side. And you'll place it inside there, have the seams line up. And just as a tip in case you don't know, it's good to have your seams going in opposite directions to make the seam lay as flat as possible. And then line up the corners, like either end of this inner curve. So I'm putting, oh yeah, and you want to make sure, of course, that your lining and your fabric are lined up. Like the lining and the print are lined up together before attaching it, so that everything is in line. If you want your lines to be straight at the end of it all, then you need to take your time in pinning in the beginning. Because it's slippery, things do get out of place, and so the more pins, the better, in my opinion, when you're a beginner. And then once you get that side in, of course, just go ahead and do the other side. I'm speeding this up a little bit because you've already seen it, but take note of how long it's taking me, because I know once I hit the machine, I don't want to have to unpick and redo it again. And of course, before you sew, double check that you have the prints right sides together so that you don't put your sleeve in backwards. And go ahead and sew along that curved edge on both sides. I'm doing a serger's, but you can also use a zigzag stitch. So the next step is to get your binding all ready. So there is a chart in the instructions that tells you how long the straps need to be and the neck. So I started by finding the center on my binding. I just folded it in half, put that middle one in, and then I was measuring on my little mat there the distance that the neck needed to have in each of the straps. So my straps were 11 inches long, so from either end I went in 11 inches and made sure that that equaled the neck distance. Then I took my swimsuit and found the center front just by folding it in half to find the front, the center of the front of the swimsuit, and put a pin in there. And then I'm going to take my binding piece and take the center piece, put it right sides together with the front center of the swimsuit, replace that pin, stick it in there, and then do the same thing with the two sides. So the pin on the side here is going to go on the very edge, and make sure you do pull out the seam all the way so it's not like curled in at all. And then do the same thing on the other side. Once I had those placement pins in place, then I went in and filled in a few more pins. Once again, because this is swim fabric and it's slippery, I add a lot of pins. If you don't feel like you need to, you don't have to. And your binding should be a little bit smaller than the neck fabric is. And so when you're at the machine, you will be stretching to fit just a little bit. Not tons, but some. So make sure that that happens, because otherwise you'll have gaping in the neck area. So go ahead and sew that on, and here is what it will look like when you are done. I serged it, and I just only did it over the neck part. I didn't do like the whole strap, the whole binding piece. Now it is time to fold over this binding piece. So you just pull that fabric up and over your stitch line. So I'm covering up my serge stitches, for example, and I'm just folding it over once, not doing a double fold, and then go ahead and pin it. Now during this time, it's a great time to use clips, actually, because it is a little bit thicker. I did use pins, but if you have clips, use them. So yeah, just pull that up and over to be able to cover up that line of stitching and pin everything in place. So one question I keep getting is what kind of thread should you use when making swimwear? I recommend 100% polyester. Make sure it's not polyester wrapped cotton. Make sure it's not like cotton. I don't know. Make sure it's 100% polyester. And brand, it does matter somewhat, but it differs per machine. So I use Maxi Lock on my serger, and I use Gutermann and um, something else for my sewing machine. I can't remember what the other one is right now. Okay, so after you get around the whole neckline, to do the strap, it's going to be a little bit different. There are two options, and you'll see which one I pick in the end. So the first option is to just fold it into thirds, and that kind of makes it match up and align with what you did along the neckband anyway. So you'll fold in one side and then fold the other over top, and then just stick a pin in it. Um, if you're wondering like which side goes on top, we'll just follow what you were doing from the neckline already. I do use a lot of pins very close together in this part because the more pins you have, the easier it is at the machine. Another option you have if you hate having raw edges show is by folding both ends inside of each other and then folding it in half. This is going to make your straps a lot thinner, and I like the wider straps, so that's why I went with the thirds, plus it is a little easier. So you can pick the method you would like and then just go ahead and pin away. Okay, and in case you're wondering, where did that random seam come from? I did not have a long enough strip of fabric for the binding, so I had to take two pieces and just sew it together. So that's all that is. So once this is done, then you're going to take it over to the cover stitch once again, or to your double needle on your sewing machine. And I can't stress enough the importance of using a double needle stretch stitch. If you don't have that, you can do a zigzag, that's fine. But doing a straight stitch is not going to last. It will come undone eventually. So here's the outcome, what it looks like. There's the two lines of sewing on the front. And flip it over, it's the cover stitch line on the back. It would be a zigzag if you are using a twin needle, which is also great, has a lot of stretch. The one thing that I was considering doing is at the keyhole, I was thinking about top stitching it down so that the lining stayed tucked under. Once I put it on my daughter, however, I saw that it stayed in place on its own, but just know that is something you could do if you're worried about it being showing through. So to finish off the ends of the straps, the more professional finish probably is by folding it down and then just stitching across. I'd go back and forth a time or two, but I always struggle with it getting eaten in my sewing machine, so I just like to tie it off like this, make a little knot, and yeah, it works really well for me. You just got to pick your battle sometimes, right? So those are the two options of what you can do to finish off your straps. All right, it's ruffle time. If you're not doing ruffles, you can skip ahead to like 15 minutes and around 40 seconds. So I already gathered the ruffle pieces. I did it on my serger. If you don't know how to gather, you can check out another video that I have that shows a little more details about it. Next, what I did is grab my swimsuit, and I had the markings. You can't really see them in this video, but I had markings in place for where to place the ruffle. So I just stuck a pin in both of those spots, like the front and back of the swimsuit, on both of the legs. And part of why I wanted to use a pin and not just do it on right away is because I wanted to also make sure that the lining and the print fabric were lined up nicely when I tried to add the ruffle, because, you know, slippery fabric here. So luckily this gathered it perfectly for me, and that was super cool. If you haven't learned how to gather on your serger yet, it's a newer thing to me, and it is life-changing. So give it a shot. Look up a tutorial about your specific machine. It is so worthwhile. Now I'm just attaching the ruffle, just putting either end into where I placed those pins, and attaching it. Make sure that the ruffle is right sides together with your swim fabric. That way you know it'll be put on correctly. And then, as always, I'm adding in extra pins in the middle, anywhere where I feel like it'll be helpful to me. When I do go to sew this, I'm going to take it to the sewing machine where I do feel like I have a little more control. Sometimes with ruffles, I think it's worth it when you have those gathered stitches to just take it to the sewing machine. I will be using a zigzag stitch, however. So once that ruffle is attached, I always check. There's my zigzag seam. I always check to make sure that I did it correctly, and if you see a continuous print, that's how you know you did it the right way. Now you're going to take your elastic pieces and just overlap it slightly and do a little zigzag stitch to connect them so that they make a circle. Make sure you don't twist the elastic. And here's the swimsuit. It is so close to being done. We just need to do the elastic now, and then we are finished. So let's go down to the leg hole. And lots of times when there's circles like a neckband or a sleeve or something, I usually quarter the area. But with this particular pattern, I felt like the leg hole was pretty small, so I only needed to find two ends. But I also use a different method than maybe you've seen before, so I want to explain it. I like to kind of sandwich the leg hole in half, and I usually use the seam from like the crotch seam, and then just kind of sandwich it in half from there, and then I stick a pin in either end. And actually, if it is matched with the seam, I don't usually stick a pin in the seam because I just know it's there. But as you can see, I am not lining up the fabric perfectly, so these are not exactly it's not folded exactly in half. What I'm intentionally doing is giving a little extra fabric to the back of the swimsuit where your bum is at, so that there is a little bit, so that the elastic cinches it in a little bit more. I have found that if you do it perfectly even everywhere, it cinches too much in the front and not quite enough in the back. And I like the bum part to be cinched in nicely and the front part to lay a little bit more flat. It's just more comfortable. My legs are not exactly the same in the front and back, and so why not attach your elastic differently? And then with my elastic, I just folded them in half. I did do that part folded in half perfectly. And then I match up the seam with the pin that I just found the two sides from, and I match up the other side as well. So when I do this little pull and release, maybe you can see that back side has a little bit more fabric there that will be cinched in by the elastic, and that was intentional. So of course now I'm going to add in a few more pins. So I like to kind of stretch it out and then pinch where it meets up in the middle and just stick a pin in there. So you can see me kind of pull it so that it's taut, so the fabric is taut with the elastic, and then I stick my finger in there to hold it in place and stick a pin in it. You could find however you like to make it so it matches up, but these, from between the two pins, I do like to make sure that my elastic is pretty evenly distributed after this. Now go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to speed it up since you just saw it, but maybe by watching through it again, it'll help you to see exactly what you should be doing. So right here, I just want to show you that elastic should be smaller than your swim fabric. And as we go, we will be slightly stretching it just so that the swim fabric lays flat against the elastic as we go. If the elastic is not smaller, then your leg hole will not pull in tight enough to your leg. So it is necessary to have it do that. And the next thing I wanted to show you were just the settings on my sewing machine. I do this on my sewing machine with a zigzag stitch, and I like to lengthen my stitch to a 2 and then leave the width at about a 3.5 wherever it normally sits. Okay, so as you get started, of course, you always want to backstitch. Another thing that I've discovered that works really well for me with swimwear and with elastic is to make sure that my needle ends going down. So if your machine can do that, it really helps so that in case anything does try to slip up, the needle is holding it in place. Now I'm going to try to line up my elastic. I was struggling right off the get-go to have it pull far enough over. So as you can see, I'm using all my fingers to hold it in place. But after I got that going, it is important to have one hand in the back of the sewing machine holding the elastic in place. Okay, there we go. I just grabbed it. And then have the other hand stretching that elastic out so that it does, stretching it just enough to make the fabric taut, to make it flat. And that backhand is never pulling. It is just holding onto the elastic so that when your front hand is pulling the elastic a little bit, it doesn't pull it out from under the sewing machine. And you're just, in fact, you're not really trying to do any pulling. You're just kind of you're stretching your elastic, but you are guiding it under the sewing machine. Because if there's any pulling happening, you'll probably break a needle, or you might have your thread go in knots or something like that. So if you feel like your machine is eating your elastic, it's probably because you are pulling it through instead of allowing the feed dogs to do their job, but just stretching the elastic so that it matches up with the fabric underneath it. As you can see, I'm just taking my time, taking it nice and easy. I got lots of pins in there to remove, and I go from pin to pin. So once I remove a pin, I put my hand, my thumb, and I think it's pointer finger at the next pin. And sometimes I kind of flip my hand and hold it upside down. But I get my next pin lined up. I make sure my elastic is right on the edge of my fabric. And then I stretch it to fit the fabric and just continue on. And if I feel secure, then I'll go the whole way. If I don't, I stop and adjust. I always stop the machine, make all my adjustments, and then move on from there. Some of these instructions might sound kind of silly or redundant or something like that, but I'm trying to coach you through my thought process as I am sewing, to help you with any troubleshooting you might need to do if you are struggling with your machine. So also, if you have the capability on your sewing machine to lessen the pressure from the presser foot, do that as well. So here's my elastic all in place. What I want you to notice is how my swim fabric on the back side is a little bit more gathered up with the elastic compared to the front side that is gathered but a little bit more flat. So that is exactly what I was trying to achieve, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. So the last step for this leg band is to just fold the elastic over, and we're going to do a top stitch on top of it. I'm going to take it to my cover stitch. So go ahead and pin it all down. I did find, clips are much better to use in this situation. I needed to use the pins wherever the ruffle was placed, just because then the clip couldn't really go over the ruffle. But that might make your life a little easier, so I just wanted to throw that out there. Another thing, the reason why I'm even doing this, because some people might just take it straight to the machine, is by kind of just folding it straight over, I'm trying to prevent any twisting from happening, because when you fold over binding, especially when there's elastic involved, sometimes it kind of twists a little bit, and that's where you see your binding like it looks like it's rippling almost. So I wanted to show you here, mine rippled just a little bit along the top right there because I didn't take as much care as I was sewing. So I'm trying to prevent that from happening in the leg at all, because sometimes it can affect the way that it lays on you when you're wearing it as well. So I'm doing my stretch test. I pull the fabric, or in between where the pins are at, I kind of stretch the elastic a little bit to see how the fabric is pulling. And if it looks like it's starting to twist, it's going to do that once it's sewn. So adjust your clips to make sure that they are just on straight and that it's not making it twist at all. So here's an example where this one I needed to keep adjusting, and I pulled it and it twisted again. So I just kept slightly adjusting it to make sure that I was going to have a good outcome in the end. And for this particular one, I wanted to just show you how it is going to be necessary to kind of stretch it again, because you stretched that elastic initially. you need to stretch it again so that the fabric will lay flat. So one hand in the back, one hand in the front, stretch it till the fabric looks straight, basically, till it looks like flat. But as you can also see, I'm using like all of my fingers to make sure that my fabric isn't trying to like pull and like tuck under or, you know, anything like that. So I'm taking it very slow. I'm just doing like little bits at a time, and then I stop, get my hand situated again, and then I go. And you can see how my middle finger is kind of trying to push that fabric off to the side and make sure that it doesn't try to tuck under. And I'm going to change the view here in just a second so you can see better. Okay, so here we are from the top view, so you can see how all of my fingers are doing everything they can to pull all the fabric off to the side enough to make sure that, you know, there's just not excess getting folded over with the elastic. Another thing that I want to say is I do stitch pretty close to the edge of the elastic on the inside to make sure that that elastic is being held down. If you don't go quite far enough over, then that elastic will try to like pull up a little bit. So I actually almost like to have, like how there's two needles on top, I like to have one needle either right on the edge or just off the edge of my elastic, and the other one for sure on. Talking about the inner edge, not the outer edge. So I hope that makes sense, and maybe you'll see it when I show the seams after. So just a note about elastic. I do prefer to get the 3/8 inch elastic that is meant for swimwear. It usually says that it's like chlorine safe or says that it's swim elastic somewhere on the packaging. I do know that people sometimes just use regular elastic though and get away with it. Also like the kind that's like I can't remember what it's called, but it's where it's like a plastic elastic. I've seen that been used as well. And that would probably hold it pretty well in chlorine compared to regular elastic. If you are just using this for one season, you know, your kid's going to grow out of it and never wear it again, that's probably fine. If you're hoping that it'll last you a little longer, then I totally recommend the one that's like chlorine treated, meant for a swimming pool. So that's my note about elastic. Okay, here is that finished product. As I get in a little closer, you can kind of see how you don't see the edge of my elastic at all because I covered it up really well with that cover stitch machine. So anyway, and the ruffles came out so cute. Once you top stitch it, they lay down just right. I am going to go back in and finish those on my own time. I'm going to do a straight stitch over top to make it lay flat and zigzag stitch my threads inside the seam. If you haven't seen that before, I'll link a video that shows how to do it. But here is that finished product, and man, as soon as I put it on my daughter, I fell in love. I want to make her a bunch of leotards, and I want her to be a little ballerina now. So here she is at the pool. We went the next day, and she loved her new swimmer just as much. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, or if there's anything specific you want me to cover, and check me out on Instagram for more details of things that I'm making at Come Create with Kim. Thanks. Talk to you later. So some bonus content for anyone interested in making this swimsuit without any lining, but they still want to have like a panty liner in it. Then I just wanted to show you how that would be done by showing you some underwear that I made for my daughter. So what you would need to do is just cut out a piece. I would first sew the print fabric together and then measure how big this is here and just cut out a panty liner and attach it. You can use like a straight stitch, or you can just go ahead and serge it right in. And you only have to really attach the sides. this part doesn't actually need to be attached. So you can, if you want to, like if it meets up well with the seam, then you could attach all 3 parts. But essentially, if you just want to have a little extra protection right here, then just sew it into the side seams like that. Super easy. It'll save you on lining fabric, just depending on how you feel. Also, you can line your swimsuit with regular swimsuit fabric as well. That will result in a tighter swimsuit because lining is usually a lot thinner and just not quite as tight of a fabric. So be aware that it may change the fit a little bit. But if you do want to scrimp and save and not worry about those extra steps, then you can just put in a panty liner like that.